Hello and welcome to the Special Olympics Australia webinar series, Autism Inclusion in Sport, Recreation and Physical Education. This is webinar 6, Inclusive Practice for PE Teachers and Schools. My name is Sarah Whedon and I'll be hosting the webinar today. So on behalf of Special Olympics, thanks for joining us. Now, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands from which we gather today and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So this webinar aims to increase your teaching toolkit and provide you practical tools and strategies to support all students in your PE and sport programs, with particular consideration to those students with autism. We want you to be well informed and confident in your inclusion practices. We'll also aim to identify evidence-based approaches and explore further professional development opportunities for you to implement into your practice. And we also hope that other key enablers such as community sport coaches and administrators will gain an understanding of the educational environment to connect and support young people with autism to participation pathways in community sport. So the approach to meeting the learning outcomes for this webinar is to enable a general understanding of autism, give insight to lived perspective of autism, provide practical PE teaching tools and strategies, explore participation and engagement options for people with autism and where the school plays a role, introduce evidence-based inclusion approaches and connect you to further learning and support. And we see that the education and community sport environment has a key relationship to supporting physical literacy. So if a young person has a positive experience and feels supported in PE class, they may be more inclined to seek community sport participation pathways. Conversely, if there's a positive experience in community sport, a student may be better engaged in PE class. And, you know, ideally, a school and community sport program could work together to provide extended pathways for people with autism to participate and develop their physical literacy. And this is especially important right now for people with disability who we know are generally more socially isolated and excluded. So physical education and sport can be a great platform to develop skills and social connection for people with autism. This is the 6th and final webinar in our series. We've done a deeper dive into some topic themes such as understanding autism, the information you might seek to fully understand and support individuals, and we looked at communication and inclusive practice and some sensory sensitivities. So we'll cover some of this information for you today, but we thought the real value would be the practical tools and applications that you can apply to your own setting. So if you do want to explore some of the other topics we've provided in the previous webinars, you can access these via SOA Learn, and SOA Learn is Special Olympics Australia's online learning platform. So you can access the webinar recordings for all the webinars that we have, the associated resources that we've attached to each webinar, which you can download and keep and amend for your own purposes. And also we're offering a certificate of learning that might be valuable to some of you in your profession. So you can access SOA Learn through the Special Olympics Australia website, or just type in SOA Learn into your search engine. And we also have another course, so you can see they're circled on your screen. We're offering another free course on SOA Learn, which is an introduction to autism spectrum disorder. And I know some of you have already completed this course prior to today's webinar, but it gives a great insight and perspective of people with autism. And you can also get a certificate of completion for this module. So if you want to get onto this online module, and with the webinar series, there's over 12 hours of free online learning for you in inclusive practice. You might also see on SOA Learn that Special Olympics Australia has developed a whole suite of resources that would support teachers, disability support workers and sport coaches to deliver high quality physical activity programs for people with intellectual disability and autism. And this range extends from online learning modules to program and lesson plans that can be used in schools, to game cards and coach accreditation courses. And some of these resources are aligned to the Australian Physical Literacy Framework and are also endorsed by Sport Australia. So again, these can be accessed on SOA Learn. They're all free and they might form a very handy part of your inclusion toolkit. I'll just outline who Special Olympics Australia are, because I know we have a lot of new audience members on today. So we're part of a global sporting and inclusion movement, which has got a steep history. It's been operating for over 50 years, and it was developed by Eunice Kennedy Shriver, who was sister to US President John F. Kennedy and sister to Rosemary Kennedy, who had an intellectual disability. And the fun fact is Special Olympics is the only organisation authorised by the International Olympic Committee to use the word Olympics. So today's Special Olympics supports over 5 million athletes in 177 countries. And in Australia, Special Olympics Australia supports over 7,000 people with intellectual disability and autism through a number of sport, health, recreation, education and leadership programs. So Special Olympics Australia offers 17 official sports and provides year-round training as well as competition at local, state, national and international level. And the pinnacle of the Special Olympics competition calendar is the World Games, which is hosted on a 4-year cycle in both summer and winter sports. Special Olympics also works in the school and education space. So last year we had about 3,600 students participate in our schools program, and we're really pleased and excited to have recently announced a pilot program called Inclusive Sport in Schools. And this program aims to increase the skills of teachers, coaches and volunteers to provide a highly inclusive sport and physical activity program for students with and without intellectual disability to participate together and also contribute to pathways to community sport and long-term participation. And you might see on your screen that we have 3 distinct sub-programs of the Inclusive Sport in Schools program, which engage a range of participants in school and education settings. So we have the Playing for All program, which is aligned to the Australian curriculum in HPE and also the Australian Physical Literacy Framework. We have the Young Athletes program, which is an early years fundamental movement skills program for children with an intellectual disability, but also without an intellectual disability, so maybe peers or siblings. And then the Sport Partner program, and this is a program with adapted versions of NSO school programs. So the pilot's initially being rolled out in New South Wales, and Special Olympics are currently looking to recruit schools and endorse coaches to be part of this program. I know we do have a lot of New South Welsh people online today, so if you do want to register or just show an interest, you can reach out to our schools team. Their email is at the bottom of the screen, but it's schools@specialolympics.com.au. Back to Victoria. We'd really like to thank Sport and Recreation Victoria for their support in the work that Special Olympics Australia have been doing within the autism space. They've supported this webinar series, but also the online module, the Introduction to Autism Spectrum Disorder. And this is Sport and Recreation Victoria's support of the Victorian Autism Plan, which seeks to provide greater opportunities for people with autism to participate and contribute to the community, and it seeks to address the experience of exclusion faced by people with autism. So to that point, although we're a national program and a global inclusion movement, the webinar and our presenters today are all Victorian based, and the references will have a Victorian lens. However, I think we've been able to create the information so that it's broad enough you can pick it up and implement it in your own specific setting. So our presenters today, we have a whole range of fabulous presenters to offer real world strategies and also some evidence-based support for you. So you'll hear from Joshua Cox from Disability Sports Victoria, Robin Goulding, who's a HPE specialist at Sunshine Special Developmental School, VFL player and autism activist Elise Muller, physical education teacher John Doherty from Girton Grammar School in Bendigo, and Professor Nicole Reinhardt and Dr. Anna Montilla from Deakin University's All Play. And we'd really encourage you to ask questions and reach out to our panelists today. We have a jam-packed webinar. Usually we have a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but I think we're going to run out of time today. So if you have a question as we go along, please pose those questions, click on the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar, and that will make sure that our panel sees that there's questions specific to them. If you want to chat or you want to share some resources or some approaches that you've had with the rest of the audience, please use that chat button to do that, and we just need to make sure that we refrain from using any identifying language if we do that. But yep, please reach out, chat and engage. To help us out online today, we have a PE specialist in Sarah Mohammed, and now Sarah teaches PE at Broadmeadows Special Developmental School. but she's also had extensive experience in the mainstream setting. So Sarah is online today, and she might chip in with some few answers in that chat today, or share some resources or some tools that she uses. So hopefully we have all bases covered. So let's kick off with Joshua today. So Joshua is the Chief of Research at Disability Sports Victoria, who runs the Pegasus Project, and this is a really interesting project. So I'm really keen for Joshua to share his approach to support teachers who are then supporting people with disability, in particular today to autism, with you all today. So I will hand over to you, Joshua. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Brilliant. And then I will share my screen.
Yes.
And then
we've got it. Thank you.
Perfect. So you should see a very, very green Disability Sports Victoria. I want to start off by thanking Special Olympics Australia for organising this, and as well as Sport and Recreation Victoria, who have been a tremendous friend to Disability Sports Victoria. So one of the things that's really cool about my job is that I get to work with all types of people and help kids from primary school to high school in mainstream schools actively participate in sport. So we very briefly have to talk about the medical model of autism spectrum disorder. And this is something that you will see in individual learning plans and student health reports. But I really need to point out that it's not a particularly useful model for teaching, and it's not a particularly good positive model, and people make a lot of assumptions based upon the words and the terminology in this report. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, and then we'll talk about inclusion. So within that medical model, you'll see that ASD is characterised as a pervasive developmental disorder, and that basically means that there's some delays in development of socialisation and communication skills. There's a big book called the DSM-5, and this is the Statistical and Diagnostic Manual, and this is the big book that allows clinicians and researchers and doctors to be able to say, here are the things that allow us to give somebody this particular diagnosis. So what you'll see up on the screen is that there's two columns. So you'll need all of the ones in column A and at least two of the ones in column B. And so there's some symptoms or some behaviours that you may exhibit. Not all people will exhibit them because autism is a spectrum. The one that I think is really important and interesting for PE teachers is hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input. And so this sometimes means that people and children with ASD may not be aware that they're overheating or that they're exerting their bodies too much. So it's really something that you want to be aware of when you're actually implementing classes. So some of you may be asking, what happened to Asperger's syndrome? And that's a term that's commonly used. So the DSM-4, which was the previous one, had 5 of them, and they found that those 5 weren't particularly useful. So what they did was they rolled 3 of them into the one autism spectrum disorder. And this was a much better way for us to be able to help and assist. And so you may find that there are people that say that they have Asperger's, but moving forward, we want to make sure that we're using autism spectrum disorder. The other thing that you may see in your individual lesson plans or your care plans might be the terms high functioning and low functioning. And I really need to stress that these are really outdated clinical terms. And once again, they're not particularly useful. But when you see them, a high functioning means that the individual has autism spectrum without an intellectual disability. And low functioning refers to an individual on the spectrum with an intellectual disability, which is usually of an IQ of less than 70. And once again, as I said, these are really outdated terms. And so we really shouldn't be using them in practice. So we think of autism, we call it a spectrum because people may experience or exhibit different behaviours or feelings at different points in the day in the week. And so we tend to think that autism goes from less autistic to more autistic, that it's a straight continuum. And the reality is that it may be different things, and there may be different parts or feelings that people are having. They may be having a bad motor day, but they might have better executive functioning on that day. So some better terminology to use is high care or low care, and be aware that people will move through that in a particular day. So some of the behaviours that you may see in the classroom is you may see differing social interaction for the situation. You may see that the kids don't maintain eye contact. You may see some compulsive behaviour and some repetitive movements and some persistent repetition of words or actions, and they may struggle to take advice. Once again, this isn't just kids with ASD, this is all kids. And so if you can get the right environment for everybody, then you will minimise these behaviours. Problems paying attention. Once again, I teach, so I see problems paying attention throughout all kids. And some other common symptoms that you may see in the classroom with kids with ASD is anxiety and sensitivity to sound. And what we definitely know is that these can become greater challenges when combined with other diverse needs. So it's really about looking at the individual and using that individual care plan. There is a difference between, a little bit of a difference between boys and girls. So boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed than girls, and girls may be actually underdiagnosed and underrepresented in our data as they are good at masking or mimicry. So this means that they are a little bit better at replicating other behaviours, and so we may not see it. The other one is that girls may internalise negative emotions a little bit more, and this can cause additional distress. But we need to take each person as an individual because it's a spectrum. So that's the medical model. And what we want you to do now is we want you to walk with us and our amazing panel, and we want to move away from this medical model and explore the person-centred model. So who are we? Disability Sports Victoria. We were established in 1985, and we're an umbrella organisation that services state disability sporting organisations and their member athletes. And we promote the development of sport and recreation for all abilities from grassroots to elite competition. We want to help every single person fall in love with movement. So the Pegasus Project, which is my original research project, is professional learning for teachers working with students with a disability. So it may be outside of autism spectrum, but we have a large autism component. What we do is we help with improved understanding of students' potential and the importance of appropriate benchmarks for assessment and reporting for students with special needs. And we come to you because we want to be able to see the environment that you and your amazing kids are working in. And we assist the teaching team with a whole school approach because effectively that's how inclusion works. So we also help you with metacognition in education and your teaching practices. And so there are 4 questions that I want you to ask yourself right now before we move into some of the other presenters who will talk about more in-depth strategies. But the first thing before you enter is, what are you trying to accomplish? What strategies are you currently using? How well are those strategies currently working? And what else could you do to improve? So before we start the class, please be aware that ASD kids overwhelmingly want to be included. And there's something that I call the meltdown neighbourhood, which is something that can happen when the environment is inappropriate. And the meltdown neighbourhood is when the kid is having a sensory overload and they really go into themselves. And it's a safe place for them to be in there, but it's not a productive place. And so some ways that we get those kids out of that neighbourhood and out of inside themselves is to tell them about the emotions that they're experiencing and ask them. So you want to say, Billy, Susie, you look really angry right now. What's going on? Because that will help them understand where they are within their emotions. The other thing that you want to be aware of is that kids who are on the spectrum can have difficulty in predicting what comes next with movement patterns. So when they are presented with something unpredictable like a moving ball, they can become quite frustrated, all right? So practical inclusion, these are things that a teacher should say out loud, is that it's okay that I need help. And that's why it's fantastic that there's so many PE teachers coming along to these type of events. It's okay that I'm frustrated, and the best teaching is one that has a whole school approach. So once again, that important, why am I doing this? Why am I teaching this? And what is the skill that I'm trying to learn? The other thing that you want to do is ensure your inclusion efforts are not resulting in exclusionary practices. So what this means is that we don't have one group of kids doing this activity and then a child or an individual by themselves doing another activity. That becomes exclusionary, and we want to make sure that everybody is participating. So some things that you can do is learn about the learner from the learner. Ask the kid, ask the person. Teach to the fascinations, give choices in your activities. You can get the kids or the individual to help with organising, because that can decrease a lot of anxiety around the space. And then make sure that you support your transitions, because the transition time is when kids or anybody with a disability or a diverse need, it's really a vulnerable time for them. And if you can give them support during that transition, then they may be able to move from high care into a low care into the next stage. And our role as teachers is really to move people forward to become the best people that they can be. The last thing I'll leave you with today is the 4 pillars of Disability Sport Victoria is collaborate, educate, innovate and advocate. And this is a comic strip that has always made me feel just wonderful things because I think it really summarises sort of the work that we do. So it's sort of about looking at the outcome and then just maybe going through a little bit of a different process. Because when you can change that process a little bit, you include so many more people, and I think that that's the real rewarding element of teaching. So thank you very much for listening to me. If anyone has any questions, you can grab me in the chat at the end and I can release my contact details. Thank you.
Thanks, Joshua. What a great, short, sharp but concise information you've shared with us today. And I've known we've spoken off the air, and you know, the Pegasus program goes into schools and offers almost like a bespoke program working with teachers to support particular students and their families, and you provide a whole of school approach. So we are going to put your details up on the screen at the end of the webinar. But if you are thinking that you do want some one-on-one support to really develop your inclusion skills, if you do have particular students that you want to try and support, then I know the Pegasus program can help you with that. So thank you so much, Joshua. That's fabulous.
You're welcome.
So we're going to move on to Robin Goulding now. So Robin is a HPE specialist at Sunshine Special Developmental School, and she's also the specialist professional learning team leader and the aquatics coordinator at this school. And this school educates primary and secondary students with moderate to severe complex intellectual disability. And Robin started her coaching career with special needs kids at the age of 16. So she's got a huge amount of experience. She's worked in schools in Britain, in Kuwait and in Australia. And Robin's presented at ACHPA conferences many times, and also with Sport and Recreation Victoria. So Robin today is going to share with you the inclusive practices that she uses in the classroom. So she's going to get right down to that frontline delivery and share those strategies with you. So I will hand over to you, Robin.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. So like Sarah says, I'm from Sunshine Special Developmental School. So I'm just going to say at the beginning that while this webinar is designed for students with autism, this can actually be, some of the strategies I'm presenting on today can be used across a wide range of intellectual disabilities. It is all about getting to know your student, what works for them, their strengths, likes and dislikes, but these strategies are not just for students with autism. So moving on. Now, I've only been given 30 minutes, so I am going to put a timer on because I am likely to go overboard. Timers are a great way of helping students with autism understand how long they've got on a task. It's really good because it's very clear and it's non-negotiable. Now, you can always add time on, but if you've got a timer that a student can see, then they know when the activity is going to end and their next activity is going to start. It is also, like I said, it's non-negotiable and it's clear boundaries. So using a timer, and this can be used in your actual activity. So 5 minutes warm up, 10 minutes on this passing activity, or if your student needs a break, again, put a timer on. Okay, you can have a break for 5 minutes. But I really recommend the use of timers because they're clear and they help students understand when they're going to have to transition to the next task. So also, probably one of the most important things that we use in our school is a visual schedule. Now, every single class and specialist teacher has a visual schedule. So I'm just going to go through a couple of different options that you might want to use in your school or your PE lessons. But first of all, we're just going to watch a short video of what exactly a visual schedule is.
Our feelings are finished. It is time to find out what we are learning about.
So a visual schedule is really good for instructional processing, for changing tasks, and for keeping students on track. And all these could be difficult for a student with autism. So just moving on to the next page. Now, I know the images may be a little bit blurry, but I'm going to talk through them. There are two types of visual schedules. Now, the one on your left is a whole day schedule. So I tend to use these with my primary students. And again, the classroom teachers have these, and basically it goes through the students' whole day. So toilet, PE, art, morning tea, playground, all the way through to when they're getting on the bus at the end of the day. And it's really important to have that morning tea and lunch in there because everyone wants to play, everyone wants to eat, and certainly everyone wants to get home. So students know what they have to get throughout the day in order to get home. It makes it a lot more easier for transition from activity to activity. So simply, I will have this up, a primary class comes in. Okay, so they've got PE now. When PE is finished, it goes into the finish box, which is the black and white checkered box, and they now know that they've got art. Similarly, they could have PE maybe session 3 or 4 just before lunch. So that top row would be empty, and then it would say things like PE, lunchtime, playground. Also, you don't necessarily have to know what each student is doing in their classrooms. You might just have a classroom visual. So you might have PE, classroom, morning tea, lunch, classroom. It can just be a very generic classroom symbol. So visual schedules are incredibly important for students with autism to understand what they've got to do throughout the day. And also the one on the right is a PE specific schedule. So you might choose to use this. I've used it with a lot of my secondary classes to really help them create a routine within PE. So it's feelings, what are we learning about today, warm up, stretching, running, because that's what we were doing in the lesson, feedback, and then choice time. So this is very clear about what each section of PE is. Now again, as you saw in the video, at the end of each activity, I take the students back to the board and we say that it's finished and move on. So it's explicitly teaching that part of the routine of the visual schedule. However, you don't necessarily need to do this. As Josh mentioned, students with autism can be really good at actually organising and helping you. So maybe your student with autism actually could be in charge of the schedule, but you've just got to be very clear when an activity is finished. Oh, okay, our warm-up is finished. The student with autism can go to the schedule, take that one off and put it in the finish box. And they then are accessing it and looking at the schedule. So they then know, oh, okay, well, warm-up is finished. Next is our stretching activity. So I really recommend visual schedules. They should be used throughout the school. And if you certainly can implement them in PE. And I'm going to show you another type of schedule now. So this is an individual schedule.
Throw and catch with a friend, then target. But first, throw and catch with our friend.
So So you might not be able to have that whole school black schedule. It may not just be in your school's budget, or it's not something, but you can have individual schedules. So that is just a smaller version with that each individual has. Again, depending on your student, they might just keep that to themselves, and they might use that to help transition through the lesson. As long as you are using the language that that activity has finished, they can make the connection, oh, this is finished, moving on to the next activity. Like you saw in the video, I actually worked with the student to go through the timetable. They might have a buddy that can help them, or a support worker that, again, while you're teaching, they might be able to help them work their individual schedule. So I've got another example here of an individual schedule. This one again is kind of the whole day. So it's not just like that previous video, which was very specific to PE. It's all about getting to know your student, and also it's trying to be consistent across the whole school. And also trying to use the same visuals across the whole school. So whatever, and I'll talk about communication systems in a bit, but whatever visuals you are using, they want to be the same on an individual schedule or a whole class schedule. And also, if your student needs a little bit more focus on their, you can actually take the visuals off the schedule board and just kind of put them on a quick individual schedule to help them as well. But I really recommend using schedules because, like I've said, they're great for instructional processing, to help them transition from task to task, and actually also keeping them on track. Also, so again, this is probably the most used visual in our school, is first and then. So if we want students to, for example, in this picture, the little student sat in the ball pit and didn't want to move. So we went through first PE, and then you can have the ball pit at the end. Or you've got first PE, then you get morning tea. So again, there wants to be a reward on there, whether that reward is morning tea, which is within your schedule, or it is something specific, like they get 5 minutes shooting a basketball, or they get a break. But whatever it is, first and then is also a really good way of engaging students. If they decide that they want to do something else, okay, well, how about first PE? Then you can have your choice of activity. But first and then, again, this visual, I cannot recommend it enough. Same visuals as the whole school visual board, sorry. And also the same, you can actually, again, take the visuals off that whole schedule and put it on the first and then visual. So they are just focusing on two things, because they could become distracted at all the other different visuals. So first and then visual, I really recommend being used. And also make sure that you're using that language in your lesson. So first we're going to warm up, and then you're going to practice basketball. First you're going to talk about your feelings, and then we're going to warm up. So again, really recommend using first and then language. So here is just an example of it being used.
So for example, I use the first and then. So first we're going to do PE, and then you can go to the classroom where you can have your headphones.
So the student in the video loves his music, and it's a really good way of getting him to engage in the PE lesson. So first he has to do PE, and then he can get his music. But whatever that then is up to you. But obviously you need to know your student and what's going to motivate them to actually do the PE lesson. So up next is feelings. Now Josh spoke about this a little bit previously. Feelings are so important, and not just for students with autism or other intellectual disabilities. Emotional intelligence is something that most job requirements want. They want people to know their feelings. So it's really good for you to explicitly teach feelings to the whole school. And feelings also does come under the health side of the HPE curriculum. So we use zones of regulation in our school. You'll find loads of resources online if this is what you want to go down. I'm going to show you an example of how I use them, and then we're going to explain it a bit more.
Dong, where's Dong's photo? Good boy. And can Dong tell me how he's feeling today? Good looking. How's Dong? Dong's feeling happy. I like that Dong feels happy. Good boy. Can you put it on? Good job, Dong. Dong feels happy. Chanel, how are you? Where are you today? How are you feeling? How's Chanel feeling? Oh, you're feeling sick? Yeah. Yeah? Why are you sick? Oh, your chest.
So I explicitly teach and allow time within every one of my lessons to teach feelings, because I said Chanel was sick, so I could then adapt some of my practices to make sure that she would engage in the lesson, even though maybe she was in the blue zone and not feeling very great. So but you don't have to have it individual like what I have done. I do recommend though that you do spend a lesson explicitly teaching feelings. Now I'm going to keep talking about the zones of reg, but you can adapt it to whatever you want. So the green zone, they're happy, they're calm, they're ready to learn. The yellow zone, they're starting to maybe get a bit silly, or they're a bit anxious and they're excited. And that's kind of yellow zone is where they may need to start taking a break. You might need to start adapting your practice, because what we don't want is for them to go into the red zone. So the red zone, they're overexcited or they're angry. And this is where we would use the word dysregulated. So the students are dysregulated. And then we also have the blue zone, and the blue zone is when they're maybe sick, when they're hungry, or when they're tired. Again, it's really important because all of these can have effect on how they are acting, behaving, and also how engaging your lesson is actually going to be with them. So once you've explicitly taught this, you could simply have a yellow, blue, green, red cone out in the hall. Okay, right, when you go into the PE hall, sit behind how you're feeling today. Exit ticket, tap on the post-it note of the colour that you're feeling. It's really good for check-in, and it's also really good because you might notice that something's not right with a child, and you might have to refer that onto classroom teacher, your leadership. So actually that kid's indicated that she's not feeling great. I think something's going on there. Can you just check in with this? So, and also we know that feelings can affect kids that have been through trauma. Every mainstream child, like I said, feelings are so important. And also the red zone, we're just going to talk about this a little bit. When they're in that red zone, that is not a teaching moment. So let's just go on to this one. Again, a bit unclear. Now I, again, have all these individual ones. You could just have the three faces or just simply the colours if you've explicitly taught it. Now, the red zone is not a teaching moment. Now, we as teachers, and I am guilty of this, our classroom, our rules, you're going to do what we say. You don't get a reward unless you complete A, B, and C. You've got to earn that reward. And that's a very teacher thing. And I am hands up. I used to do it all the time. However, when a student is in a red zone, it is not a teaching moment. More often than not, they're in sensory overload, and anything you say to them is just not sinking in. And it's not to do with a bad attitude, or it's not to do with they just don't want to do something. If they have reached the red zone, then more often than not, like, it's a neurological, it's their nervous system, and they have very little control over it. So in that moment, they get what they want. Whether that is a break, whether that is they get to go play with their toy, but in that red zone moment, their child comes first. As long as everything is safe, and that is the safety of yourself, of the child, and of the rest of the class, you need to do whatever it is for them to calm down. Once they are back in the yellow and green zone, that's when you can start a teaching moment. Okay, so how did you feel when you went into the red zone? What was your trigger to the red zone? What could you do to help calm down and go back into the yellow zone? I just want to make that really clear, because I know it's something that for ages I was like, no, I'm not giving the kid what they want. They're in my lesson, you know, they haven't earned that reward. But if they need to play with a toy or have a basketball or take a break for 5 minutes to calm down, it is really important that you give that child, and this is also students with trauma and other disabilities, not just autism, that space to then go back down into the yellow and green zone, and that is when the teaching can begin again. So a couple of ideas for break spaces. The tents are really good. They're just a plain black. They help reduce noise. They help reduce sound. And so they can be really good. Trampoline, if a kid needs to bounce around and actually release some energy, having a little trampoline in the corner. But again, I want you to teach the students, this is linking into the zones of reg, that they need to communicate that they want a break. So when they're in the yellow zone, they should starting to be learning that, oh, okay, I need a break. So they're going to show you the visual, or they'll verbally communicate it, and then they can have their break. Also, use a timer. So if they're in the break, okay, you get 5 minutes and then you are back into PE lesson. Use the first and then. First break, then PE. But again, try and set some boundaries, because if they're in the yellow zone, they can still be taught. So try and set some boundaries around what that break actually is like. And also, you could do a whole class break. It doesn't just have to, if you can see your student going to the yellow zone, you know it's going to affect the whole class. So, oh, hold on quick, right, everyone stop. Everyone lay down, take 10 deep breaths. So you don't have to do it individual. It can also be whole school. And also, again, you might have a buddy system. So your buddy can maybe go for someone that you trust. That child with autism needs a break. Okay, take your buddy and go and shoot hoops for 5 minutes. So there's other ways that you can incorporate it. It doesn't have to be just completely individual. So social stories, we use these all the time and I cannot recommend them enough. Again, a bit like the visual schedule, it's going to help students with autism process change and transition, not just in school. So you can have things in school. So if you go, for example, your timetable, 4 weeks dance, 4 weeks basketball, 4 weeks tennis, you can have a social story that says, next week we are moving on to basketball. And so they can get used to what is coming next. This example I'm going to show you is also about going swimming. So again, it's something different. They've got to go on a bus. They've got to go out of school. It's a change in routine. They can also be used for like losing a relative. If they're really close with a relative, they might need to have a social story to help them prepare for that person no longer being in their life. So social stories are really good. And I'm just going to show you this swimming one so you can get an idea of what it is.
Going swimming. We go on the school bus to the swimming pool. At the pool, I will get changed into my bathers. I will try to get into the water. I will listen to the teacher. Sometimes we will play games in the pool. After I have finished in the pool, I will change into my clothes. I will go back to school on the bus. It is lots of fun to go swimming at the pool.
So social stories are used by classroom teachers, by your PE teachers, and you can even send them home so that the parents can read them as well. But again, really important to help processing change. Same visuals as you would use in the school, or you can use pictures. And again, the language will depend on the student. Try and have a choice of equipment. So what is your end goal? If it's throwing and catching, actually no, we're going to change that. If it's handball and football, do they have to use a football? No, they can use a different ball. It's not necessarily going to work straight away, but they are still understanding the movement. They are still understanding the skill. You can let them try any piece of equipment, and then you might say, oh, how about you try this one, and hand them a football. But don't think they have to be working with exactly the same equipment as everyone else. Try and have a range of anything to get them engaged first. Engaged first, learn the skill, and then you can maybe put the correct sporting equipment with them. So try and have a range of equipment available too. So also different ways of learning a skill. Now, we all have teacher and peer modelling. That's standard for PE teachers. Videos, so some students completely ignore me, but I can place a video in front of them and they can pick up the skill very quickly. Also skill books, so similar to a social story, you might have a skill book that says, so for example, a chest pass in netball, make a W behind the ball, and then look at your partner and then pass to their chest, whatever it is. You can also have a skill, but I also have used a yoga booklet that just has each pose on a different page. And I've had students just take that book away, work independently and complete the skill. And then when they've understood it through the book, they're able to come back to the lesson and join in with their peers. So just also think about the different ways. Again, it's all about knowing your student and how they're going to learn. I'm not going to touch on this, go into this too much, but this on the right is pod, on the left is Proloquo to go. So they're different communication systems. Now, you might have a child with a communication system. They tend to be a bit clunky and they're not the most practical for PE. So what you can do is you can create an ALD. So an ALD is an A4 piece of paper with the most appropriate visuals on. A4 piece of paper, laminated, it's easy to carry around, so you can just use certain visuals. So you might have up, you want a kid to stand up. You might have stop, finish, more, and that kind of terminology. You might have run, you might have warm up, you might have throw in and catch him. But I would really recommend, if you've got a student that does use communication systems, you do need to be using it in your lessons as well. Also, if you're using things like Proloquo to go, the speech therapists do say that even verbal students can benefit from things like this because it's actually increasing their vocab. So yeah, just a little bit about communication systems. So sensory regulation. So like I said earlier, when students can be in the red zone and they're very dysregulated because they're in sensory overload, there's a couple of different tools you can have that will help. So weighted vest or blanket. So they might need 5 minutes with a weighted vest, and that will help them calm down. You can get little brushes on the hands, kinetic sand, you can get the massage rollers, or the picture is the little vibrating massager, and just placing that on their body is going to help them calm down. So if you've got a student with autism, you really should be talking to a whole care team, occupational therapists, speech therapists, your teachers, your parents. And you might find that occupational therapists will be able to help you with some sensory equipment that can help when they're in that, or even in the yellow zone, and they just need 5 minutes with it to calm down. So individual student profile. Now I know there's nothing on the screen. There is an example on SOA Learn, and it is incredibly detailed. It goes through everything you should have in there from a school's point of view, and your ISP should be done with parents, with teachers, classroom PE, art, if you've got a speech therapist, occupational therapist, and if possible, because the most important person is the student with autism. They will be able to tell you exactly what they like and dislike, what triggers them, what they need to help them calm down. So your ISP is really, really important. So, however, so I have 195 ISPs in the school. Not realistic for me to know them all. I would say if you've only got a couple of students with autism in the school, you should know your ISPs. If that is not possible, you can have what we call behaviour alerts. So this is one from my school. Their behaviour is biting students' ears. Something I need to know about to make sure they obviously don't harm anyone else. The trigger is because they're already sensing feedback, and then it's also got support strategies. So this can be anything from punching a wall, throwing things, biting, swearing, whatever that behavior is, you can identify it in a smaller document. Triggers are really important. You need to know the triggers so you can hopefully prevent them. And then the support strategies. The support strategies as well are whole school. So you can't be doing something different in the PE classroom as is being done in the main classroom, and same with at home. So these should be done with the parents as well. So behaviour alerts, if ISPs aren't reasonable for you to know everyone's, something like this can be really valuable in getting to know your student. Right, I've nearly finished, a little bit further from me. So, other things to consider. Students do not need to join in. We really want PE to be positive. And like Sarah mentioned, if they're positive in PE, they might go and join in community sports programs. We really need to make it positive. So they do not need to join in. If they spend a lesson being sat out because they're just observing. So for example, you've changed sports and now that you're on to hockey, or they might be a bit unsure about this. There's a lot of equipment, there's a lot of noise. They're okay to sit out for a lesson and observe. You might even just put a hockey stick next to them They can be sat there holding that hockey stick. That is fine. You might have a buddy sit with them and they can talk about, what is going on in the lesson. But yeah, so you don't have to have students to join in. Is the space suitable? Again, you might have students that can't go in a particular room because next door there's a load of noise coming from the kitchens or coming from outside. And if there's all this noise, they're going to get distracted. It might have they might not particularly like going outside. I know, again, we want to say, well, tough luck, this is the space. But we want that student to engage, and that is more important than you just switching and finding a better space. Linking that to making sure if you have got students in wheelchairs, it is wheelchair accessible. School changing facilities. A lot of students with autism don't like that changing room because it's small, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of noise. So that might be a trigger for then a negative PE lesson because it's starting off with something that they really don't like. So what can you actually do to help them with the changing process? Also really important is what lesson the timetable is, PE. For example, if they're in 5th lesson, they might have been having or trying to suppress all their impulses all day. So they get to 5th lesson and they are exhausted. So we're very unlikely to be able to change the timetable, but what are you going to do to accommodate that? They're maybe not going to want to run around for half an hour. So what can you do to help still keep them engaged, but give them something that's maybe more appropriate? If it's just before lunchtime, they're likely to be, we all get hungry, but again, like some of these students, they don't realize what these feelings are actually doing on their body. Like Josh mentioned with the overheating, they don't always understand that they are hungry or they are overheating. And that is why there is a change in behaviors and they're starting to edge towards the yellow and the red zone. So also be aware that hungry, and the same if you've got PE first lesson. If they've been on a bus for ages, then they might not be ready to move, or they might need more movement because they've been sat down for a long period of time. So again, all about getting to know your student and what is, and thinking about where your lesson is in the timetable. Allow processing time, repeat instructions. Positive approach, you really need to be positive. We want HPE to be a really positive experience. Now, with this, I'm going to say, as PE teachers, we're very much right, go, go, go. We've got 1 lesson a week. We need to hit all these goals. We're going to be moving for 40 minutes, and we've only got them maybe 35 times a year because of the way our timetable works. We're not going to lose a lesson. And I don't like using that word, lose a lesson, but I know as a PE teacher, that's sometimes what it feels like. But you are not losing a lesson if you spend it explicitly teaching feelings, if you spend it explicitly teaching about breaks, if your child with autism is starting to go into the yellow and red zone, completely scrapping what you were going to do because maybe it's basketball and it's too noisy, let's change our games up. It's okay to be able to do that, and I really think you need to make sure it's positive. So if your lesson isn't what you want, that is fine. In the long run, you want your child to be engaged in HP, because if they have a bad year with you, it's going to be the same throughout their life. So keeping it positive, and it doesn't matter if your lessons change and adapt, because that is better for the long run. What is 1 lesson over a lifetime of sport? So really try and think about that when you are teaching your child, and maybe you're thinking, oh, I'm not hitting today's goals. That is okay. Literal language, students with autism are very much take everything as you say it. It's a team effort, really cannot promote parents. Well, actually, no, first you need to talk with the child with autism, parents, classroom teachers, speeches, OTs, the whole lot. Buddy systems are great, but again, needs education for the buddy around what makes a good buddy. Stations within PE lessons, you might have 5 stations. They each have to move around. Really good because it's very easy to differentiate stations and really easy to explicitly teach at stations. Students with autism, my timer is just about up, so it's a good job I'm nearly finished. Students with autism really pick up on facial expressions and body language to keep everything positive. So that is me. There's no time for Q&A, but feel free to email me with any questions or any more, if you want any resources or anything I can help you with PE in the lesson. And I'm now going to hand you back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Robin. I know we've given you a short amount of time to cover lots of important aspects about supporting students with autism in HPE classes. So you've done a great job. You've covered visual schedules, and we have had a lot of chat. You might want to scroll through now that you're off the air. Visual schedules, storyboards, social stories, sensory regulation. The main thing is getting to know your students and talking to them and finding out how they can be best supported, and giving us some tips to be able to have the license to adapt our PE program. So you've done a great job in a short amount of time, and there's been heaps of chat. So go back and scroll through that now that you can have a little bit of a break. But as we said, we can't cover everything in today's session, so it's a bit of a taster. I know some of the stuff that Robin spoke about today have been covered in our previous webinars, and that hasn't been PE specific, so we've developed this webinar for you today, but I would suggest going back and then getting that context as well. And it's being delivered from another voice, which also consolidates. That's the messaging that we want to share. So thank you, Robin, for that. Our next presenter is Elise, and I'll just ask Elise if she can turn her camera on and her mic if she's there. Here we go. And just your mic there, Elise. So Elise is an amazing person. She is an VFLW Indigenous football player, an AFL disability ambassador, an autism activist, consultant, speaker and mentor, and is the founder of Active Support. She's also a qualified teacher's aide, community worker and personal trainer. And Elise has won loads and loads of awards for her work both as an athlete, but as a disability leader. There's a lot to Elise. She's a strong disability advocate, and she's described to me recently her special interests are sport and autism. So what a great way to combine these two interests today. As an athlete, Elise has reached some amazing milestones. She's competed in the Women's National Premiership League for soccer. She's represented Victoria twice in the Youth Girls AFL National Championships, made the AFL Indigenous National Team, the Woomers, and played in the VFL at both the Western Bulldogs and now currently at Essendon Football Club. Elise has spoken about her lived experience of autism in some of our previous webinars, and if you've heard her speak before, I'm sure you'll agree she brings an extremely honest and valuable perspective to her inclusion journey. And I know after today you'll be screaming out to hear some more from her, but so we're going to let Elise have her turn at presenting now, and I'm going to sit back and learn as we go. Thanks, Elise.
Thanks, Sarah. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. And I'm just going to, there we go. So I'm on the autism spectrum, as Sarah said. I'm proud to be neurodivergent because I've been able to learn what I need to succeed and how to access this support. And I've been able to identify with learn to identify my strengths as being on the autism spectrum, but this wasn't always the case. I do run PDs for inclusion in school practices. Today I'll be speaking about my lived experience, and I'll give a 15-minute snapshot into my lived experience as a student with autism in PE class. A bit of a disclaimer, and I say this before I speak all the time, I'm speaking for myself with autism. I'm speaking from my lived experience, and everyone on the spectrum is different. Equally also, how I show up with my autism is different based on lots of different things that we can go into in different talks, but a lot of the time, as teachers, you might see a student show up in a particular way and then hear from their parents that they are really, really struggling, and there might be a misalignment, and that definitely was my experience in many cases from school to home, and that's why I was holding it in so much. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. This is a 15-minute snapshot, and probably not the whole grasp, but I'll do my best. I want to first meet you where you're at and ask you to reflect on how do you feel about having someone with special needs attend your group. So think about what feelings come up for you and do you have any concerns? And I'm going to be completely neurotypical accessible and not autism accessible and not leave too much processing time because I'm on a 15-minute time limit. So who was I as a student? On the outside, language commonly used about me was that I was hyperactive, the challenging student, had lots of energy, which clashed with the teacher's lesson plans. My life purpose had its place carrying around my soccer ball everywhere. This made me a bit of a target to school bullies because it could easily be kicked away and I'd spend the whole lunchtime chasing it. New teachers were warned about me leading up to their class, and when you had enough, you'd send me out of the classroom. I was a student with great energy who was very literal and was drawn to fulfill impulses. And I speak past tense when in reality it was pretty easy to think about how was I as a student, because this is how my friends and family would describe me now. I might switch up. Okay, so my first experience with sport was actually my first experience feeling connected to the world. I always believed I was in a game of Sims because I couldn't control myself and I had an immense amount of anxiety. But I remember in PE class, it was prep and I had a basketball and I was bouncing the ball and it was what everyone was meant to do, and I felt an immense connection. I always saw what I was doing as very important, and the hyperfocus is like a magnetic field. I was hyperactive and it was a fun way to burn energy. So in PE class, we'd play, this is in primary school, would play fruit salad, and the teacher would go, on your mark, get set, go, or they'd yell out tomato, and the tomatoes would need to run. And I was like so excited that I could never get the point in which I needed to run. So she'd be like, on your marks, get set, and I'd already be off when she said on your marks. And then when it was drilled into me to wait until the person said go or tomato, they'd say on your marks, get set, go. And then 3 seconds later, because I had a processing delay, I would go. So I remember one time that Ian Thorpe from the Olympics false started, and I felt completely inspired, and that I wasn't alone, that I had what it took to become an Olympian, because if there was one thing that I could do consistently, it was that. As time went on, movement for me became my most effective tool for self-regulation. I learned my stims could be challenged in a socially acceptable way, such as exercising and playing sport, and sport became my special interest. I have gaps in my skill set, and this confused my teachers. So a question they often ask was, how can Elise be so good in one area and struggle in another area? It's as teachers had less motivation, whether they were, in my experience, old and over their job, or whether they had just spent too much time with me and were over me, they gave up on me and they sent me out. When a teacher didn't know why I did something or didn't understand my needs, it was labelled as behavioural, and this happened probably 95% of the time, except for when there was a teacher who got to know me. Having autism means I am often misunderstood and my behaviours was misinterpreted. I was actually speaking to Sarah on the phone in preparation for this talk, and she was asking me, and I thought I'd share this story. As soon as I go off script, you can see my processing, so I'll just continue reading. But it was with Mr. Hennetman. He was a good teacher, and he had let me go out, let off some steam in the hall, and I went and I ran and I was shooting the basketball. What I didn't realise is that there were lots of artwork displays on the corkboard just under the basketball hoop, and there were tables everywhere because the other United students had been setting up for the school theatre production. And obviously I took a shot, got it in thankfully, and that was my priority, and it bounced and knocked artwork, knocked cutlery, went down, made a lot of noise, and that was the type of student I was. Another example was in class, we were told to stay in class after the bell, but this was at the end of end of period 3, so it was coming out of lunch, and I needed to go out. The teacher told me not to walk out that door, and I was obedient and instead climbed out of the window. What the teacher saw was me being naughty and inappropriate, and I got a detention. What was going on for me though was that I had a clear end goal, which was when the bell goes, and to stay in class after the bell. By that time, I needed to head out. I needed to get out. In telling these sometimes humorous stories, what I'm not conveying is the part where I went from a complete high state to being told off and feeling ashamed. As there were more and more of these incidences, and in a lifetime of going to 7 different schools and just going through year 12, there are a lot of them. Incidences hearing, stop talking, please listen, don't do that, please leave and go outside. Not having access to the teacher because to get support, because I had a delegated support person, which was a teacher aide, which I did that course to work out why they were getting it so wrong, and the course didn't mention autism once. It was mainly around, it didn't mention autism once, and it was like I didn't have access to the teacher who had done more studying, had to go through the teacher aide who didn't have the qualifications of a teacher, whereas we should really be equipping the teachers with those skills and insights into autism, which is why it's awesome to be part of this webinar, and great that teachers are listening. So the classes, other incidences where the class were being asked to get into groups and partners and no one wanted to be with me, and my aversion to the whistle, or not being able to wear the uniform or touching certain surfaces was me being seen as difficult and it being behavioural. So when the teachers would ask there to be 2 teams, I remember it's one incident, and I say incident, but it was just an experience. But there was one experience where the teacher told the 2 kids to be 2 coaches and pick out the teams, and they went one by one, as you do. And I remember it got closer and closer and closer to the end, and I considered myself pretty good at sport, but I was also that weird kid. And as it started to get closer, I'm thinking, my name's going to get called out. And I had this hope. And then it came to the last 2. It was me and another person, and they had an injury, and I think they had a sling, and they weren't able to participate in the sport. But that captain, the student captain, still chose that person over me. And so then I walked over to the other team. I was a bit disappointed and thought, okay, I'll go to the other one because it was their turn. And then that captain said, no, it's okay, you can have her. And then they would say, no, you don't want her. And that was a very triggering experience, and something that I've reflected on a lot. And it's made me have, still to this day, a fear of participating, a fear of, and just a complete belief that people don't want me, and what I've been trying to work in my own therapy for. The messages I received from these experiences were that I'm different, I'm not wanted, I'm not enough, I'm inappropriate and stupid, it's not okay to be myself, and I don't belong. I learned it is inaccessible to be included, so I gave up on wanting to participate and said I didn't care. I didn't feel confident in participating and perceived my efforts as risky and unsafe because I wasn't able to judge how the teachers or my peers would perceive me. And I had a lot of self-doubt. Eventually, I realized it is safer to not want to participate, so I protected myself and withdrew. This had a significant effect on my mental health and beliefs. And I learned that the world didn't want me, and I became really anxious and suicidal. I hated autism. I hated what made me different. And I made it clear to my mum that I was born without consent. And if I had a choice, I wouldn't want to be alive. And that was a pretty low few years with that mindset. Becoming in this state of withdrawal, and why I'm sharing this is with low self-esteem and perceiving my ability as incapable and the world as dangerous, is a disability like of mental health on top of autism. So whatever strategies new teachers come up with that would have supported my autism is inaccessible, because I'm not in a state to believe in myself to take it on. So a lot of the times, especially if you're working with young students who have been in the education system for a little bit of time or had previous experiences, it's important to understand that we're almost trying to undo and prove wrong that these anxieties and create safety. When the person's anxiety is high, we become withdrawn from learning, and participation is not accessible. The first priority should be establishing a good rapport where I understand it is safe for me to be myself. When you get to know me, not from a deficit-based lens, but a strengths-based approach, you learn that my autism is my strength. And you learn that I am consistent in what I need, even though my behavior initially might come across as really surprising and really big. The things that I need are consistent, and and you learn that my special interest is my strength and your leverage for success in the classroom or PE class. Fast forward to the period I have found my place in the world where I belong, and it wasn't from hiding who I am, it's from using my strengths. What was labelled as a deficit, when made accessible, has become my strength. So my obsession, or I say special interest, but my obsession in the sensory stimulation of playing ball sports is my leverage for motivation, which Robin touched on as well. My tunnel vision deficit is my ability to hyper-focus on one task and perfect that strength. My black and white restrictive thinking gives me clarity and logic in tricky decision-making and can be utilized with bounded questions as opposed to broad. Rather than being anxious to fail, I can have that change to being focused to succeed. Because even though I'm anxious, if I'm anxious, it shows that I care, and I'm engaged. I'm aware that that's happening. I just need to feel safe and know that I can be a part of that. What can restrict me can enhance me. I speak a lot about autism, and I haven't actually spoken about this in talks, I don't believe, but I speak a lot about it with my clients. I speak about autism. Sorry, I'm just like saying, I speak about this and not talking about what it is. I speak a lot about autism being cross-cultural, which could actually be a whole other talk. Sarah, if you're listening, or Sean, I need to stim. Society doesn't accept or condone my stimming because they have fixed and narrow understanding of what that they should accept. So stimming is repetitive movements for self-stimulation, not just movements, sorry, it could be auditory. I am literal, but it's only an issue for when I am speaking to a person who is speaking metaphorical, or examples being humorous or being sarcastic. If we look at autism communication as a process, if we look at autism communication processing as a culture though, and understand that speaking literal is a completely effective way of communicating when everyone speaks the same language. Or another example is eye contact is a social practice that people in the autism culture are told not to do when speaking to people with autism, or can't do. You don't perceive that person who isn't understanding your language as stupid or not intelligent. but you understand that they are from that culture, or that's their way of processing. And while they're living in this new or neurotypical dominant environment, on top of how they already effectively communicate and process information, they're trying to make themselves accessible to understand how you communicate. And that's what my life growing up has been a lot. I can communicate fine, but the people around me have a different way of communicating and processing information. In my life, people have seen me as stupid solely because they can't alter how they communicate or can't understand how I communicate. When learning a language, I also should say that it's not cultural. It is the way that I need to communicate, but I was using that as an analogy. When learning a language, it is easy to relate a new learning, such as a word, to what I already know. If I do not understand, learn to speak my language. Give me processing time, speak in literally, create structure, avoid sarcasm, make your humor accessible, create social stories, all that. Have a strengths-based approach. An example of what a strengths-based approach can look like in PE class is allowing my special interest to be part of the conversation. What that might look like in a PE class is using the music in the background being the theme song of my interest. And even if you're thinking hypothetically, Bob the Builder, or High Five, or like I'm using an example of a childish, a society putting it as childish. Yes, year 7 and 8, because they're all trying to be cool, will think that that's not, but you put it on and you embrace it, and everyone, even if you're a year 10, just can rock and can play great sport to High Five theme songs and Bob the Builder. Another way of making my special interest part of the conversation is creating different stations and naming one of those stations my special interest, and naming them all maybe different parts of different students' special interest as well. So it's not about me, but there is a part of me in it. Allowing analogies of my special interest to be incorporated in the class to aid my processing. And I speak about this in the World Autism Day Disability Sport and Rec talk. I give an example. I want to also completely back what Robin has said. I use and need social stories, especially when going to a new place. And if I can make it accessible to you guys of what that might look like, an example might be you might go to a cafe but look up the menu before you go. So that's the same as me, but I will look up what does the place look like. I'll need to know all these times, and I'll create a story from before I go to sleep to then after I leave that place of all the things that are going to happen. And it might sound pedantic or unnecessary for someone who doesn't understand that, but all my friends just give that information to me anyway, because they realize that I'll show up and I won't be really, really anxious. I'll know my role. Having bounded questions is really important. Requiring to be intentionally taught my feelings and reading my body is actually something I'm learning at the moment. Having an aversion to going somewhere or speaking to someone can be because of the smell of the room or the person's perfume, can be because it's a new place, can be that I am completely exhausted. And now that I've said can be 3 times, I'm going to stem that in my head for the rest of the talk to give you some insight. It might be that I don't know what is going to happen. It might be that you told me that something will happen at this time, and because I was doing really well, you extended what was being asked of me, but I am then overloaded and am then reluctant to keep going. In shutdown mode, I become selectively mute, and it's selectively mute but it's really non-verbal because I can't speak. And for the most part of year 11 and 12, my anxiety was so high that I didn't speak when going to school, which is very different to when I was younger and really hyperactive. And that was all about anxiety. If I'm anxious, what your go-to should be is to create safety, so that I know that I am safe, I am valued, I belong, and I can do this, or this is accessible. It's really important to rectify the language you use to speak about me and other students with extra support requirements. How you speak about me will come through in how you show up to me, and we read it. As someone growing up with a disability, we can read when someone's putting on that high pitch and going, yeah, do you like that? And it's the most frustrating thing. I speak to my clients, even if they have a intellectual disability, I speak to them monotone, and I don't baby them, because they are a person, and it's not a great deed to support someone with a disability. It's that person's right to have the other person be accommodating and to respect them. I am not someone living with a disability if the adjustments you make create accessibility. When you observe my behaviours with the lens of what is wrong or a disability, then it prevents possibilities for that to be changed. We are not a burden, we are smart, we just think differently to how you think. And it is frustrating for both of us to have to make our communication and processing accessible to each other. To give you insight into my world, we come from different processing systems. My differences are labelled as special needs, and your differences are shared with the majority. We both deserve to have our needs met and to be included. Everyone has a right to be included. What is good enough for the majority isn't good enough. I may have extra support requirements, and to access our need is a right. I want to redefine disability. It's not the person's disability that makes the system inaccessible. It's the current system that makes the person's ability a disability. A disability only exists when the support required isn't readily accessible to the individual. It is a failure by the community and the schools, and a loss to society when people with a disability are left behind. This has nothing to do with the ability of the person, but the person's access to perform their ability. I said it 3 different ways. I acknowledge that if people just like to, and they got it on the first one, but I just wanted to make sure that part sunk in. And yes, I've heard a lot, nearly finished. I'm gonna grab water. I've heard a lot in my life of, I say in my life, that's sounding like I'm old. I'm getting distracted, sorry. I've heard a lot, Elise can't do this, and Elise will never be able to do this. And that's because the person's talking about me wasn't prepared to imagine what I would receive my right of accessing the support to achieve my potential. It's because the deficit-based lens was focusing on the burden of my needs, not the opportunity to be supported, and certainly not the greatness of the potential that I and other people on the spectrum have. Because if they did, the conversation in my early childhood would be very different. It would have been, wow, Elise has so many strengths, but first we need to make sure her environment is set up for success. It shouldn't have been, Elise can't do this. It would have been, Elise requires support to be able to ... or Elise requires individual support to learn these skills. It will take Elise longer for Elise to get there, but she will with the right environment. Elise, instead of Elise focuses too much of it on her interest she's in a world of her own and needs to stop this to connect to the world, this being sport. It would have been, with Elise's special interest of sport, Elise feels safe. Elise makes sense of the world through what she understands, and Elise connects to this world through a special interest. This special interest can be challenged with a strengths-based approach as a leverage for motivation to succeed. Instead of Elise's special interest and safety in carrying the soccer ball everywhere makes her a target to school bullies who knows they can take it off her and cause a meltdown, it would have been, taking the special interest away from Elise will trigger anxiety and withdrawal, and we need to instead create an environmental change of acceptance with her peers. Instead of Elise is obsessed with sport and needs to focus on her classwork. There are no balls allowed in the class. This is the way it's always been. It would have been, Elise can utilise, and actually this happened when I got to Year 10, Elise can utilise her strengths and interest in sport to focus in class. Elise responds well to clear, fair rules, and when given the chance, she shows up and responds well to these expectations. So for example, I would bring a soccer ball in and rock it under the table, and I was able to then stay in class instead of needing to go out 3 times in a session to run and let off steam, or the year before that being sent out. I was able to actually stay for most of the session, and if not, only go out once. Instead of Elise is refusing to attend school or participate, this is behavioural, and Elise doesn't want to participate. We aren't excluding ... It would have been, this behaviour is an indication that the approach and environment is not currently accessible for Elise. What amendments to the environments need to be made for Elise to be able to attend? And that's hopefully a question that you can ask yourself. It would be, nobody wants to be excluded. Everyone wants to be included to feel connected and to participate in what makes us feel safe and what is beneficial for us or we see purpose in. We need to identify the cause and reason and reduce the anxiety. Our approach needs to be made accessible, and we need to communicate accessibly the purpose, and so that I'm on board with the purpose. It wouldn't have been Elise cannot participate in class and struggles in groups. It would have been Elise is going to play elite sport. Instead of Elise should be in a special school, which I got told in Year 10, it would have been Elise is going to hold professional development workshops for teachers to teach them how to teach, and maybe make classrooms more accessible. It would have been Elise is going to co-create the first person-first autism course. Instead of Elise will struggle making and keeping friends because people with autism struggle with relationships, it would be Elise is going to create her own business where you can buy a friend to play sport with. Instead of Elise is too impulsive, her behaviour needs severe attention and we can't trust her on the Year 10 school excursion, it's going to be Elise is going to be invited by the government house to have breakfast with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Prince Harry and Princess Meghan. And it was funny, actually, the difference between my autism and the neurotypicals. The neurotypicals showed up, they were completely calm, and I was completely anxious and just over it because I had to take public transport, which I do not recommend for myself in the future. And then the army dude told us, gave us all like these things such as you need to refer to them first as this and then later as that, and you need to not go to shake their hand only if they go to shake a hand, all this courtesy. All the neurotypicals became like really, really anxious all of a sudden, like the thing went down, and I was like, autism for the win. I know what to do, and I'm feeling comfortable now that I have my structure and rules. This is how I feel as well going into class, where the students knew what was socially acceptable. And I didn't have my structure. The school didn't teach social skills, and students learnt that naturally. And even as when, like my siblings, when they were 1 or 2, they played with dolls and they played with, and I just lined things up. I needed to be taught the social stuff. Instead of this has always been done, it works for the majority, it would be what works for the majority is not inclusion. The conclusion, speaking of, when we are adequately supported, my disability is not an inhibitor for me to participate, and it should never be used as an excuse for a student to not be in your class. When we have the right tools and are open and flexible to change the way things are normally done, my disability will not be a burden. To be inclusive, ensure that there's an invitation to participate, accept my capacity and how I show up, be innovative and flexible to, I'm using Josh's word of innovative, copying that, be innovative and flexible to go against the norm to enable accessibility for me to participate, and implement strategies for me to help my potential. And a lot of those have been said in previous webinars, Special Olympics, and Robin had great ones as well. At the beginning of my talk, I asked you to what comes to mind when you think of having someone with autism or extra support requirements in your class. To find success in your classroom, I now ask you to shift your perception away from what it means to you and towards what it means for us as a student and a participant. Hopefully, for some of you teachers, that age gap of thinking back to a student isn't too much of a stretch. But yeah, I think there was so without having the proper support, having autism in a school was a prison sentence. I always felt as though my disability was like running a 100-meter race where everyone starts at the starting line, except my starting line is 80 meters behind. Being born with autism meant I was born into society that thrived on the one thing I struggled with, communicating and relationships. I have since learned that I communicate effectively and it doesn't match, and it can match. And I've also learned that the reason why I struggle so much was also because it wasn't linked to my strengths or learning style. To give an analogy, and I use this analogy a lot, it's like I am in neurotypicals are like indoor soccer boots, and which allows them to run on any surface. And I am normal soccer boots, which on a hard surface, it's unnatural, it's uncomfortable and unstable and hard. But for grass terrain, which is my terrain, the shoe's natural surface, it has grip on the, it has better grip and I can run faster than any indoor boot. The neurotypicals can go both on the hard, on the hard surface and the grass. I can only go, or I should only really be going on the outdoor surface. However, and it's uncomfortable for me to go on the indoor surface. However, when I'm on the outdoor surface, I don't have a disability and I am a lot faster than anyone else. Autistics, and I say autistic, but we should match what the person identifies as, whether that's on the spectrum, for example, but autistics are not less than anyone else. We are simply different. It's normal to be different in this world. I do not suffer from having autism. I have only ever suffered from people not understanding my autism. Our weakness can become our strength, and what makes me as the have the edge to the outsider. But I need the amendments to be in the race. I want you also to return actually to what Robin asked, and she mentioned what is one lesson in a lifetime of lessons, and she was saying it for the this is my processing now because I'm going off script, but she was saying it for you as teachers to think about letting not being so fixed on what you wanted to have done in the session and being more accommodating to the students. Hopefully in sharing my story, we can learn that I've shed some light on, this is embarrassing because I really try not to go off script, but what is one lesson in a lifetime of lessons is actually really, really big for the student with autism, and it really can make all the difference. For me, it can mean the difference of I had an experience where I belong, or it can mean the difference of me feeling that I do not belong in this world. And you can, if things aren't going well for a student, you can be another example of us receiving that belief. Or if you take the time to create rapport and to learn my interests and to be innovative, you can make a massive difference and you can save a life. Sport is my passion, and I'm going to exit this as I do it, but sport is my passion, and it's not everyone on the spectrum's passion. In fact, usually it's not, but also usually I meet a lot of clients who have had negative experiences with sport around sensory, around peers not accepting them, and it's important to acknowledge that. I'm just going to randomly just stop speaking, Sarah. She's back. Great.
I'm back. Thanks, Elise. How absolutely fascinating and insightful. And as always, you've taken that strength-based approach to give us that insight and to reflect on our own thinking and our own teaching practices and approaches. And I can assure you in the chat, some people have had or made some revelations and have been able to think about or rethink that strengths-based approach. So I think you've really made an impact there, and we'd love to listen to you for much more extended time. And we're sorry that you've stopped talking, but you know, you can always reach out to Elise, and she's always full of, you know, that positive strengths-based approach. So thanks again for sharing your experiences with us. Okay, I know we're over time, and if you're willing to stay on with us, our presenters are willing to stay on as well. So we've got 2 more presenters to share some stories with you. So please stay on. We probably should have made this a 2-hour webinar, but we haven't, but it might extend to that anyway. So our next presenter that we have is John Doherty from Girton Grammar School in Bendigo. So John's been a PE teacher with 15 years experience, but has had the last, I think, 12 years at Girton Grammar School in Bendigo, and has worked with a lot of students who required extra support and extra support for their social, emotional and academic needs, and he works very closely with students who have autism spectrum disorder. So John saw a bit of a need and created a program called a Sporting Chance program. So it's a program which engages both the school community but people outside the community. I am going to ask John to talk more specifically about that, but as a introduction to the program, hopefully this little clip will work.
For the past 5 years, students with autism from across central Victoria have gathered at Girton Grammar for a sporting chance, and it's something they love.
I like coming here to see all of my friends and having fun.
I also like meeting new friends here, and it's really great exercise.
I came here as a social opportunity, having had social challenges.
PE teacher John Doherty saw the need to start the group.
Being a phys ed teacher, and I was also working as a case manager with children who are on the spectrum, and I could see how hard it was during a phys ed lesson that it was for these particular kids to take part.
In a regular PE classroom, it can be noisy, unpredictable and chaotic. The program modifies the environment to suit students with autism, which allows them to gain the full benefits of participating in sport.
I don't really care about the skill acquisition anymore. It's more about belonging to something. And these kids, it's one thing that they have that they can come along to each week. They don't feel judged. They don't feel that they'll fail.
Some of the children learn enough in this program to be able to participate in mainstream sports. And while most of them have been coming for a number of years, this is Remy's first day.
It's really fun.
They're paired with a student from Girton Grammar in the hope they form a lasting friendship.
With these kids, you actually have to be their friend to find a way in.
Abigail Blakey, Win News.
Okay, so I will hand over to John so he can talk about the A Sporting Chance program. Oh, hang on.
Thanks, Sarah. Hopefully that's working okay. I'll just set this up a bit better. It's a little bit like Bradman coming on after Elise. She's done a fantastic job there, and thank you so much. Like anything, being a teacher, we learn something all the time, and I certainly learnt a hell of a lot in that last half an hour, so thank you very much, Elise. As Sarah just said before, I work at Girton Grammar School in Bendigo. It's a regional part of Victoria. And I've been a phys ed teacher here for 10 years now. And for the last, I suppose, 5 years, I've taught mainly as have taught as a specialist phys ed teacher with the primary kids from prep to year 5. But basically, a Sporting Chance program is what I'm going to cover. And a Sporting Chance program, as it says there, is an inclusive sport and phys ed program aimed specifically at young people from the ages of 5 to 16 who are on the autism spectrum. And through this program, the participants are exposed to the specific language, rules and skills that are related to many popular sports and games that are played within schools. And this program's been in operation since 2013. And since that time, we've had well over 100 children who have attended, and we've opened the program up. It was designed for the whole broader Bendigo community. We have some families which travel over 70 kilometres so their kids can attend, which is a tremendous commitment and fantastic that they can do that. I suppose why the need for a program like this, and it was through my work here at Girton, where I was lucky enough to be employed, and I started out teaching PE, personal development, outdoor ed, and I was also very fortunate to be involved in an area which we had at Girton here called HQ, and I was working as a case manager under the guidance of a man called Nigel Vernon, and he was tremendous in his efforts in being an advocate for young people who are on the spectrum, and making sure that they were catered for. And then part of that job was being a conduit between the student, teachers, parents, and health professionals as well. And it was through that work there that I really become aware of children who are on the spectrum and how difficult it was and the barriers that they faced at school and in life. And then I reflected on my own PE teaching and my classes, and I realised sometimes I really wasn't catering for the needs of children who are on the spectrum. So I saw a deficit there and thought, I really needed to fix that. And as it's been said time and time again, the schoolyard at any time is noisy, it's unpredictable, it's chaotic, and so is sport. We have ambiguous rules. I mean, you watch AFL these days, and it's very hard to understand what the umpire's decision is, and it's never black and white. And I've heard it described before. For a person with an ASD, it can be like trying to make friends whilst on a roller coaster ride with heavy rock music blaring. So overwhelming, and that's what PE classes are like. And really, if you can't participate, it results in poor skill development, decreased levels of fitness, social isolation, and a disconnection to sport. And as Elise said earlier too, she is very much connected to sport, and that's her thing. But a lot of children who are on the spectrum, sport is not their thing. And if we give them a bad experience early on, when we're trying to set the foundations for movement, foundations for enjoyment of movement, we don't want to lose them to that because it has too much to offer and it's too beneficial. So we need to keep them involved and engaged. And therefore, as I said, to rectify the deficit, I thought, well, we need to do something about it and develop a program specifically to cater for the needs of children who are on the spectrum. This slide here, it's relating to, I suppose, studies and things. I did a lot of research about this when I wanted to start the program up. It's like anything, for me anyway, that if you want to know something, you've got to go off and learn as much as you can, ask people, research, talk to people who are in the know. And the studies there suggested that children with ASD can learn new sport-related skills. For all our phys editors and sports coaches, we all know that physical activity helps reduce the rates of depression, anxiety. This is more so and very prevalent in people with ASD. Sport, and I suppose phys ed, gives children and families a chance to feel a part of their community, and a lot of therapy goals such as communication, socialisation and independence to realise on the sporting field. Through sport, too, opportunities for independence are expanded, and also too, more people in the community will be educated and learn about autism spectrum disorders. So how does the sporting chance work? Well, at Girton Grammar, we have a program called a co-curricular program that runs alongside our academic program. And all our senior school students from 7 to 12 participate in at least 2 co-curriculars. That's a minimum. Some of them can participate in more. And so I worked out that this program needs to be opened as a co-curricular, I suppose, activity that they can take up. And the senior school students are offered to participate as coaches or mentors for the participants of the program. The students are expected to offer their time 2 afternoons per week, and it's approximately an hour and a half each night over those 2 nights. So it's a 3-hour commitment for the week, which it's not that much out of their time, and I think the benefits, it pays dividends. With the sessions, 1 session per week is dedicated to the theoretical and practical aspects of inclusive PE teaching. And the second session is actually at the cold face, teaching the student athletes. So I normally have a mentor session on a Tuesday afternoon, and that's where we go through what our session on the Thursday night will be. And a lot of our early sessions, we focus on teaching our student coaches about ASD. We talk about what behaviours that may present. We also have a list of students who attend, and a lot of our students who do attend, we refer to them as student athletes. And they come along and their parents have filled out a student athlete profile. So we have an idea of what their likes are, their interests, also to what their therapy goals are, their communication, how they best communicate, and we try and accommodate our sessions to meet those needs. We also look at, when I talk about inclusive PE teaching, that could be, I suppose for you phys editors, it's pretty simple in that we look at, I suppose, the closed skill continuum up to the open skill end of the continuum. And we try and, I suppose, make our skills as close as we can to the closed end. So we reduce that unpredictable, I suppose, or unpredictability, if I can say the word properly, of the skill or a movement attribute. And we also talk about too, when we are teaching, our body position, about getting down to a child's eye level, intonation, things like that, which make things much easier and much less confronting for the child. Our student coaches have to submit a written letter of application and go through an interview process to assess their suitability. We're very, very lucky here at Girton Grammar. We have some fantastic young people. It's not a case of having to help. They want to be a part of it. They want to learn, and they really, really have a real sense of empathy, and they get involved, and they are a real part of the community here in Bendigo. What I did to start with is, once I saw the need, and I made contact to a number of, I suppose, user groups within Bendigo, including the Bendigo Autism and Asperger's group, Department of Human Services. And I was lucky enough to have a number of contacts or contact details of all the sports coordinators and school welfare officers at all the Bendigo primary, secondary and the specialist schools. And I was able to send out an email to them in the early days, and they could then send that off to their networks. And basically I'd give it to any families that they thought might meet the criteria. And of course, those families then would get in contact with me, and from there I'd fill them in and let them know what the program was about, what paperwork they'd have to fill out, and then discuss their child's needs and how we can best accommodate that. I also have opened it up to the Girton Grammar School student body. So we have mentors, okay, or coaches. We have the wider Bendigo community, and also the kids who are at Girton who are on the autism spectrum. They can come along if they'd like to, and that's offered to them as well. The other part, the main team, okay, it's myself. I'm I suppose, as you call it, the teacher or the coach and the organiser. I'm very, very fortunate as well to have two wonderful helpers, and Joanne Evans is a wonderful lady who works here at Girton. She's my expert assistant. She's a PA. She's emotional support. She provides comedic relief. She's basically the chief cook and bottle washer. And another lady who is also wonderful, and I'd be equally lost without her, is Carolyn Flood, and she's a teacher that specialises, with children on the spectrum. She knows a lot about it. She's done it for many years, and she does a lot of liaising with the parents. Whilst I'm trying to run the sessions on a Thursday, she can liaise with them and make sure everything's okay there as well. And as I said, I couldn't survive without these two wonderful women, and without them the program wouldn't run. With Jo Evans, some days when you've been teaching all day on a Thursday, and you get up there on a Thursday night to run the session, and sometimes it's the last thing you want to do because you're absolutely spent. But as soon as we see the kids coming in the door and see the smiles on their faces, we love it. And Jo, we provide, I suppose, we have a bit of banter as well. And as Jo, she's not getting any younger. She's doing a great job now. She must be nearly 65 or 70. And her body makes a lot of noises, and she has a bit of a flatulence problem, and the kids just love that. So, but I have to remind them that the name of Mrs. Trumpet Bum, whilst it's funny, it's probably not socially appropriate to say that. So I'm sure Jo will be laughing there in a seat if she's watching tonight. During 2019, this year, unfortunately, has been a bit of a write-off. We haven't been able to run the program as well as we would have liked to have. But generally, we basically have student coaches. We have 14, and on average, we have around about 28 student athletes attending, and that's a ratio of 1 to 2. So one student coach will work with 2 student athletes, and that's on average. Sometimes it might be 1 to 1, other times it might be 1 to 3, and we find that particular model works pretty well. I've put pretty much of a simple scope and sequence there. During term 1, kids are starting the year. We just like it to be a bit of fun, fitness and movement, and we do a lot of, I suppose, perceptual and movement skills as well, and try and focus a lot of stuff on balance, because that's the foundation for all movement. Term 2, we look at ball handling, netball, basketball and volleyball. Term 3, soccer, Aussie rules and a lot of minor games. And then term 4, we look at cricket, hockey and T-ball. It's not always set in stone. That's what we hopefully we can achieve, but sometimes weather is not kind on us. We haven't got an undercover area that we can use. So if it rains, we're in a bit of trouble, and we either have to cancel or find an ulterior or an alternate activity to do. But again, those sessions, when I first started this, we thought we might just do 1 sport per term, but we found that no, the kids wanted more. So we listened to that and we accommodated those needs. A typical session I've written up here, because what we would have been doing this term would be Aussie rules football. So as the children when the student athletes arrive, they're greeted by their coaches. So a lot of our student coaches build up a rapport, and they might work with a particular child each week, but we try and encourage our coaches to build a rapport with all the kids, because sometimes if a coach isn't there and one of our student athletes they can grow what we call an affiliation or a real connection to them. If that coach isn't there, they may have a meltdown because of that. So we try and get our coaches to actually move about and know all the kids and build a rapport with all of them. And they spend around 15 minutes at the start of each night engaging in free play with their athletes. And a lot of that's through conversation and motor skill activities. And for football, for example, they're demonstrating the skill as they're talking to the child. So they might be handballing, kicking, bouncing the ball. But at the same time, whilst they're demonstrating and modelling that particular skill, they're also talking and conversing and basically using it as a time to check in, see how that child, see how they've coped that day at school, bit of a chance to debrief and build a rapport. It's a great opportunity as well for them to get to know the student athlete, what their interests are. And that's the main thing. They've got to find out and I suppose find a connection and find a way in. And again, our coaches model the appropriate social skills and sport-specific skill acquisition. So hopefully, it doesn't always work, but I hope our coaches are modelling the right way to do the skill, and also the way that they speak as well. And as I said, most of our kids are fantastic anyway. After that, we have our welcome and introduction. So we bring the kids in, the student athletes are welcomed, new participants are introduced and pleasantries exchanged with coaches. And the social expectations, I always introduce and say good afternoon to our student athletes. Then they have to reply back, good afternoon to me, good afternoon to our coaches, and just, I suppose it'd be just general manners. We also have a little bit of a show and tell. And this gives our student athletes the opportunity to share any special news they may have, which in turn helps improve confidence in public speaking. And I've just put some names there as a, I suppose, reminder for me. Young Jetty here, she never used to say a lot when she first started. Then each week she started to come to our sessions, she'd bring a different little toy. She might have a dinosaur, or she might have a toy piece of Lego, and she'd stand up in front of the group and she'd explain to everyone what this piece of Lego is or what this dinosaur represents, and she'd keep talking. Same with Lachlan. He wouldn't say boo. After about 12 months, he'd be up the front. He's like a conductor. We almost had to, pick him up and move him across the side because he just loved the talk and he liked that attention. But it was great to see because he started to get the audience and engage with them, and he'd speak, and it was just magic. The start of the lesson too, it also gives me a chance to outline the activities for the session. And in the early days, we used a visual schedule. We don't have to use that as much now because the children who attend know what's going on. For any new ones, the visual schedule is there and we can use that. We also have a little area which we set up with like I suppose a nice soft crash mat and a blanket, which if a child does have a meltdown, they can retreat to that area and hopefully get through their meltdown and get themselves right again. By doing that, also going through the activities reduces the anxiety about what is ahead, and hopefully that might help eliminate any meltdowns as well. The main body, again, it's just like a normal phys ed lesson in many ways. I do a little warm-up game. I find that sport-specific skills and drills, but a circuit is a thing that works really well because we can split the numbers up, have smaller groups, and the coaches are able to focus a lot more with their student athlete. And then we always finish off the evening with a modified game. And that game, there's attackers and defenders, so it's like a game of modified football. And again, the kids like to have a result, and it is really good to have about winning and losing. And I suppose the hardest part is learning how to follow the rules. It's even in a class during normal times, not COVID times, but when we're teaching normally, being able to follow rules and accept the umpire's decision is sometimes that their neurotypical kids have a lot of trouble with. And I find our student athletes are actually much better at dealing with it because sometimes it's black or white, it's yes or no. And luckily they respect me enough to follow that the umpire's decision is correct. And then at the end of the lesson, we always do a pack up and clean up. So the kids are responsible for packing up the equipment. We sit them down again, have a little bit of a group chat, discuss how things went that night. Some people might like to get up and have a chat and talk about what they enjoyed or what they didn't enjoy. We're soon told what was good and what was bad. And it also then, once the student athletes have gone, I have a bit of a debrief, and Mrs. Evans has a debrief with the coaches and discuss any issues that may have arisen and general information about that session. And again, that's things about what worked well and what didn't work well. The benefits of a sporting chance program for the student athletes I've put here, they get the opportunity to learn new skills. They form new friendships. Obviously, hopefully they increase their fitness levels. They get to develop social skills and develop social awareness. They find a sense of connectedness and belonging. And again, I've put some names down there to give me just a bit of a reminder. The little fellow here, Jaron, he came to us very much what we call a pioneer of the program because he started way back in 2013. And Jaron was being brought up by his grandparents, and he had a very, very tough upbringing, a tough background. He's ASD diagnosed. He also was diagnosed with a brain tumour and was undergoing a lot of therapy and treatment. And each week he'd come along and he'd bounce in there, and he was always so happy. He'd be rapt to come up and see Joe and myself. He'd always come in his wind cheater, and by the end of the night he'd be stripped off down to his little Louis singlet, running around having a ball. And he just loved his footy, loved his soccer. And part of his ASD was he suffered very, very deep depression to the point of he was suicidal. And I found out later on by his grandmother that through his sessions with the psychologist, the one thing that kept him on this earth was his connection to a sporting chance program. And it gets me every time talking about this because I know sometimes we don't know how much or how important these programs are, and how, I suppose, how much pain some of these kids go through, and to give them an opportunity to participate in this and to keep them going is just amazing. And we're very fortunate, I suppose, to have kids like we do at Girton and staff that we do at Girton to run these things. So I always get emotional when I talk about Joe, and yet he makes me so happy as well. And the same with Lewis and Christy and Lachlan and Nick. Nick was one of our students at Girton who's on the autism spectrum. And he was one of our main coaches, and Nick is the same. He used to tell Joe and myself if the program activities were good, whether they'd work well. So it was very black and white with Nick, and he's 21 now, and he's really kicking goals. Same with Christy. She's a participant, and she's now come up, and she's one of our coaches as well. So she's giving us a real insight into the world of ASD and what we do and what we can do to help. Student coaches, the benefits for them, it gives them leadership opportunities. It gives them a connectedness and belonging as well. It increases feelings of self-worth as they are helping others in need. And we have a hell of a lot of kids who are on the fringes or on the margins. And our coaches just plug in, they connect, and they become a real part of that child's life and development. And a lot of our coaches, they talk to me and they talk about how they have been down the street, and they might see one of these little athletes will see them in the street, and they'll come running over and they'll talk to them. And that's a real bonus to hear that. And a lot of our coaches as well, through their participation through the program, it actually assisted them with personal and career development, and it's actually opened up a lot of doors for students to gain entry to a university. So some of our student coaches, academically, they mightn't have the best ATAR score, but through the interview process and through their work with ASD kids, they've had this life experience, and they've seen things, I suppose, through a different set of eyes, and they've had to step outside from themselves and help others. And a lot of them, I know, have gone on and are now studying social work. I know one young girl has gone into medicine, and she was super intelligent, but she tells me that her time at Sporting Chance and working with such a wonderful bunch of children has really helped her development. So there's many benefits there for our coaches. For our parents and carers as well, the mums and dads and grannies and carers that come along, they get 1 hour to themselves. But they come along, they can trust that their child or their nephew or whoever it is will be safe with us, and they're going to be looked after. And they form their own sort of support network, and they can share resources. They can just have a cup of coffee if they wanted to and chat. And that gives them a real chance to debrief. So it's a great benefit for them. Finishing up, just a couple of takeaway messages. And one of the best things that I've ever been told is that if you've taught one child with autism, you've taught one child with autism. It's as simple as that. Each child is unique and they present differently. So what works with one may not necessarily work with another. You'll make mistakes. Gee whiz, I make them every day, bloody hell. Admit them, learn from them, and don't repeat them. That's another great bit of advice that I was told many years ago, and I try and live by that. I should be the smartest man in the world, really, because I've made a lot of mistakes. You need to have a thick skin and be able to bounce back quickly. I put that there because I suppose sometimes we can be told things, we can be spoken to in certain ways, and you can't take it personally. You just got to bounce back and have it like water off a duck's back. Talk to people, especially others in a similar role. Get to know what they're doing. Research as much as you can. See what other programs are running, and try and extrapolate as much information as you can and get as much support as you can. And just do the best you can with the resources you have. Again, at Girton, we have a lot of resources, and we have access to a lot of resources. I haven't gone out and bought anything. We do have a budget, which Dan Slater, who's the head of our co-curriculum here at Girton Grammar, is just fantastic. He'll do anything that he can to support us. I've tried to minimise that budget, and I use a lot of our equipment that we have in the PE department. So we're very lucky to have that. This program we don't charge. So for all our families that participate in our program, it's free of charge, because I figure that most families have got enough on their plate. They're paying for probably school fees, they're paying for specialist fees for doctors, psychologists, speeches, all sorts of things. This is one thing they can come to, they don't have to pay for, and hopefully they'll get something great out of it. And the main thing is too, if you are running a program or you're a phys ed teacher and you finish a lesson and you think, bloody hell, that just sucked. That really failed. I come out of every lesson and do that, and you think, what can I do to fix that? but don't be too hard on yourself if things don't work. We're only human. And I think we all try and cater for every individual student and try and meet their every need. And basically you can't do that. You can only do the best you can. And give it a go. Oh, I didn't realise that was the last slide there. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to finish that one up now and hand it back over to Robin. And again, yeah, thank you so much. And I look forward to keep working in this industry, and hope everyone else is keen to maybe one day start a similar program. So thank you very much. Ta.
Thanks, John. You're really one of those champion teachers that, connect kids to life, not just to education and schools. So thanks for outlining the crux of how you run the A Sporting Chance program. And there's been lots of really positive comments from our audience members who've seen you in action, and you're one of those people that's the great glue between education and community, and that can make and support people to thrive in the world. So thanks so much, and I'm sure Mrs. Trumpet Bum is of great help to you, and she'll be thanking you well after this
I think I just got a message. She said she's going to squash me like a pancake, she said.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, we've still got over 100 people still online today, so we're going to finish with the last but not least presentation today from Professor Nicole Reinhardt and Dr. Anna Mantiglia, I hope I pronounced that right, from Deakin University's All Play. So Professor Reinhardt is an international leader in neurodevelopmental disorders and a practicing clinical psychologist specialising in autism spectrum disorders and ADHD. And in 2014, she founded the All Play program that aims through sport, dance and education to improve the quality, life and mental health of young people who experience developmental challenges or disabilities. And Professor Reinhardt is also serves on the board of the directors of Amaze, which is formerly known as Autism Victoria. So Nicole will present first, and then she'll be followed by Dr. Anna Mantiglia, who's a senior research fellow at the Deakin Child Study Centre with a PhD in education. And she currently leads the All Play Learn program, which has been developed in partnership with the Victorian Department of Education and Training, and supports the inclusion of children and young people with disabilities in mainstream and specialist educational settings. And Dr. Mantiglia also runs the All Play Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander footy program. So the All Play program is an evidence-based program, but will also provide some practical strategies for you to take into your teaching practice today. So I will hand over to Professor Reinhardt.
Thank you. Hello everybody. I'm just adjusting my camera. I can't see myself, but I think that's okay. A warm welcome. What an amazing lineup of speakers. I've learnt today that we all have a lot in common, and that is we're all pretty impatient. We're impatient to change the status quo for children with developmental challenges, and we're all impatient to find solutions so that all children can be included. If we just go to the next slide, please, Anna. So what we've learned today is that 1 in 6 children will start school with a developmental challenge or disability. And if I draw your attention to the bottom of this slide, we see the spectrum of different types of challenges that children might experience. And children with neurodevelopmental disorders covers children with autism, children with ADHD, and potentially other genetically determined disorders. We know that if you have one of these disorders, such as autism, then the chances of a comorbidity such as ADHD is about 2/3 of children. So that's what they call complex presentations. I want to draw your attention now to the motor circle down there, and that's something that we've been studying for many years now. We know that about 80% of children will also have an associated motor disorder, and Anna's just going to click on this clip now, and this shows a young person with autism and a moderate intellectual disability, and we can see that children with autism have a very characteristic gait pattern that we use at the time of diagnosis and stereotypies. But what's really interesting is that over the last 2 decades, we've discovered that there's a particular link between the motor symptoms and the social and mental health symptoms of children with autism, which I'll be talking about a little bit more in a moment. Back to that later. In 2013, my children joined into Auskick for the very first time, and as I rocked up as a parent, I was absolutely struck by the fact that there were no children who were participating with disability who were participating in our local Auskick centres. And I stood back and I reflected on that and thought, well, the children who I'm seeing in the clinic just down the road, I could almost draw a line down the sand to say the children who are participating in organised physical activity and sports, I rarely see in the clinic for mental health or social therapies. They're doing pretty well versus the children who from a very young age miss out on that opportunity of participating in physical activity and sport, who go on to have quite significant social and mental health difficulties. So I see them a lot. So that really was the birth of All Play. And so if we move to the next slide, All Play has dance, football and educational programs built within it. It's a strengths-based and evidence-based program consisting of resources that are freely available to everyone, research, and then particular programs that we've developed, and again are readily accessible, to ensure that the world fits for all kids so that they can play and engage. All Play is built on partnerships with industry, government, philanthropy and peak bodies. Our founding partnership was the Australian Football League, and our founding donor was the Moose Foundation. So the first thing that once we had this vision to start an evidence-based, strengths-based program, the very first thing that we wanted to do was to go to the literature and look at, what's happened in the last 20 years of research. So we weren't reinventing wheels. So we went through this big pile of literature and published data to prioritise what are the main barriers that we need to create resources to help families and children and coaches and teachers overcome. And our first sweep through child anxiety was a huge barrier to participation, a lack of accessible and readily available resources. And another barrier was no connection between the child's clinical treatments and what was happening in the community. There was an enormous disconnect. So the first phases of All Play Footy were developed based on this literature. So one of the first problems we solved was to distill thousands and thousands of papers and literature into evidence-based resources that we could put into the hands of parents, coaches and teachers in a very accessible way. So on our website, a lot of the types of resources that have been talked about today, visual prompts, social stories, have been contextualised, particularly for Auskick, in partnership with the AFL and are on our resource. Something else that we did, we are all about excellence for children with disability, nothing second rate. And so rather than somebody like me giving the strategies and putting up the clips, we had the coaches, the champions, the stars of football who were doing the little clips on helping the community understand about the needs of children with disability. So the 1 in 6 children, including autism. So if we go to the next slide, an example of one of our programs was Pre-Learn program. So this was developed in partnership with St Kilda Football Club and Geelong Football Club. And this was developed in recognition of it's very anxiety provoking just to rock up to football for the first time. It costs a lot of money, and all of those barriers that are there often prevent families from even having a go. So we worked with the clubs to set up days that had all of the evidence-based resources on anxiety management, visual schedules and everything that's on the All Play website into these days with trained coaches. I'll show you an example of one of the resources here in this clip.
You might not have ever thought about it, but families of children with disabilities like autism spectrum disorder can sometimes be very anxious about attending a community activity like the NAB AFL Auskick.
Kids with autism might find it harder understanding instructions, They might stand too close, talk too loudly, or say things that don't seem to fit. They might need to be shown things rather than be told what to do.
Let's hear from some parents about some of their experiences.
We might pause that there. Thanks, Anna. So you get the gist of it. And a quick funny story. I remember a parent in my clinic told me once, I really don't understand the way you explain anxiety to us, but if you go to this website and listen to Nathan Buckley, he does a really good explanation. So the point there is these very accessible. What did we find? So our promise to all the organisations that we work with, we're a university, we're clinicians, is that we wrap research around the amazing programs that are there. So we wrapped research around this partnership, and we found that by designing these days in this carefully curated way, we were able to decrease parent-reported anxiety, and we were able to increase child-reported enjoyment. Not only was that, we were able to track that more children then went from these pre-learn days into community sport, which is the goal. So that's just one example. One of the things we're very interested in is understanding what are the benefits of participating in organised physical activity. And in this case, our test case is AusKick. Why are we interested in that? Because if parents are going to spend their time doing this activity or that activity or on clinical interventions, they need to know what the benefits are for their children in relation to the different challenges their child might have. And so we had a group of children who had autism, who weren't participating in organised physical activity or AusKick in one season, and then a group of children who were. And we basically compared them in a pre-post model at the start and end of the season. And what we found was quite remarkable. There was a reduction in anxiety for the children who participated and a reduction in social problems. Moreover, we found a dosage effect. So the more sessions you went to, the bigger social advantage you had, the bigger decrease in social problems. We looked further at this to look at motor skills, and we found that there was also an improvement in children's motor skills. Now, for us as clinicians, this is quite remarkable because the clinical interventions, the time and the cost and the burden cost a lot of money. And so to get these kinds of benefits, clinical benefits from doing something fun is quite remarkable. One of my patients saw the flyers in my clinic and he turned around to me and he said, "Nicole, why did you send me to all those social skills groups with other kids who are not coping with their social skills? Why didn't you just send me to footy? It would have been much more beneficial for me." And, you know, I think he was quite right. Once this program got started, the community came to us and said, well, football's great, but a lot of boys and a lot of girls are more interested in the arts and dance. And so we then created All Play Dance. The key thing about the All Play program is that we want the journey for families to have the same look and feel. So if you're using a visual schedule for football, the one that you use for dance would be similar, the one that you use for school would be similar, and that parents would be able to go on a journey and get what they need very quickly for accessibility. If we go to the next slide. We've recently finished one of the biggest clinical trials of a sleep intervention, that's another study, of a dance intervention for children with autism in a randomised control trial so that we can look very clearly at the motor, social and brain differences for the children who participate versus those who don't. We haven't finished analysing the data yet, but I've got this quote which I think sums up the sentiment of many of the families who participated. All Play Dance allows Peter to express himself. It allows Peter to smile, to exercise, to breathe, to feel a part of something bigger than himself, to be part of a group of like-minded people and to enjoy himself. He's a naturally happy child. However, since doing these classes, he's become even more cheery. I can see he identifies with his buddies and with the other children. His demeanour lights up in an environment where he can improvise and express himself physically and emotionally. And he truly looks forward to this every weekend. So that's the anecdotal findings from parents. We look forward to getting some more precision data on that. I'm aware that we're over time, so this was an absolute cook's tour, but you can go to our websites for more information. Here's a summary of key findings from our research journey so far. I think though what I'll do is summarise that by saying that there are really 3 key learnings. One is we've developed the All Play Design Principles, which are available on our web pages to help guide what best practice looks like. Need to be strength-based, need to be goal and measure and focused, and it's really helpful to measure outcomes so that you know what works and what doesn't. And to quote Nelson Mandela, sport does have the power to change the world. So as we were developing these programs, our colleagues at the Department of Education said, hey, if you're doing this for coaches and for dancers, how about for schools? And so that's my introduction to Dr. Anna Mantilla's talk. And I'd just like to give a big shout out to Anna and the All Play Learn team, who were announced yesterday as a finalist for the Australian Financial Review Higher Education Award for their work with All Play Learn. So well done, Anna, and over to you.
Thank you, Nicole, and thanks everyone for staying a bit longer to listen to our presentation. One last thing that I'd like to comment about All Play Learn is that it was co-designed with families, early childhood educators and teachers, primary school and secondary school teachers, and many other education and leadership roles, as well as peak body organizations and health and education experts. And this means that we had a great and cyclical feedback to develop the program and to ensure that it was practical and relevant to practice. And we continue to engage the community via our research studies and social media to improve All Play Learn. So I thought for today what I do is show you maybe how you can get the most out of looking at our program. And All Play Learn has a website and has courses as well. The majority of you here today are from Victoria. So you should be able to go directly into the courses page. The courses will take you into an inclusive foundations course for either early childhood, primary or secondary school. It's a 4 to 6 hour free professional development course that goes, that's accredited. So it goes towards your registration with VIT. And as I said, it's free for government schools and special schools, as well as early childhood education. And so childcare and kindergartens across Victoria as well. Then the website, on the other hand, I think the best way for you to look at it, that is going either to the primary or secondary menus. And then through there are sections that are specifically for families, but also sections for teachers. And if you go into the teachers one, you have guides and access to all sorts of different information, but I just went straight into the autism one, aware of the time, but also of trying to really highlight what's key for today's seminar. So each of our pages would look similar. It has an about section at the top, followed by strengths. And this is where I should highlight that everything that we have here, we had a great team of researchers that looked at over 177,000 papers to really gather the best evidence to pull out our strengths-based approach and our evidence-based approach to everything that we're sharing with you through All Play Learn. So as you can see, there are some strengths, and this made me think of Alyssa's presentation where she was really focusing on strengths and how you can use those strengths and abilities to then think about the support you can provide. And that's basically how this page works. From there, you move into the evidence-based strategies. And then after that, we did include a part that was the best practice tips. And these are what we know from our clinical and health expertise, our best practice strategies that you can use in the classroom as well. So we've added that to that section. At the bottom of each page, there's a curriculum considerations area, and this is where it's about the subjects, different subjects of the curriculum. And the one that I'm highlighting today is the health and physical education one, where you'll be able to go and then pull out all the key strategies there that are relevant for PE teachers. What I would suggest though, and we know this from working through the focus groups, including physical education teachers, is that they found that the most useful ones were looking obviously at the autism page, but also anxiety and also sensory sensitivity. So I would encourage everyone to have a look at those pages. At the very bottom of each page, but also there's a resource page directly from the teachers section. You have all the relevant resources for whatever area we're specifically talking about. And as you can see there's lots of connections with all the previous speakers from today. We have class schedules and visual schedules for home as well. We have emotion cards, so if you're going to be using the zones of regulation or not zones of regulations But thinking about teaching emotions explicitly, these emotion cards have been really successful and can be downloaded black and white, full color, everything else. The self-monitoring form is also a really good one to keep track of small tasks and also goals, and make sure that the children have that sense of achievement when they've fulfilled what they're needing to do. And the one that I've pulled on the right is the Strengths and Abilities Communication Checklist. This has been one of our most downloaded resources. It is a long list that's meant to encourage communication between families and teachers, also between teachers, and also teachers and the students. So it's really about all that, and allied health professionals. So it's really around connecting the whole student support group. The two sections that I highlighted there, which would be more relevant for you today, are the movement and senses and the learning ones. And this is really, again, to focus on the strengths and abilities of the child and then make adjustments to the curriculum on the way your teaching practice is given, so that it is really based on a strengths-based approach. These, again, we have lots of stories aligned with what other presenters have said today. The one that I've highlighted here is the school uniform, because this one addresses the fact that many children may feel uncomfortable, or they just need a little bit more time to get ready to use the sport uniform, if that's something that's required at the school. So one to either read with, share with families, or use as an audio version with your students, or even just read it yourself and then know some of the words that you might be able to suggest to the students if they're feeling hesitant about using the sport uniform as well. I'm not going to read these next 2 pages. They are the summary that I've pulled out from those pages that I recommended. So autism, anxiety, and sensory sensitivities. And the reason I'm not reading them is because I think the other panelists have done a great job, and I'll highlight everyone's comments around giving choices, supporting transitions, using visuals, using bodies, using emotion cards, using stories, skill books, and really making sure that we reduce the anxiety of those students by making predictable beginnings and ends of sessions, especially in PE when things can change so quickly between week and week. It's important to provide a little bit of consistency and predictability, or when that's not possible, an example like the one Robin gave about the swimming lessons is really relevant. To make sure that the students are calm and can come and engage and participate as much as possible. Again, another thing that was mentioned was around the environment and how the changing rooms or other areas around the gym can be loud and messy. So really thinking carefully about what the student needs to be able to feel calm in those environments. And just to end with some hyperlinks that are there. I thought we would have, when you go to the recording then, that might be the best way. You'll be able to identify the key pages. And again, All Play Footy and All Play Dance also have a similar structure through the pages. So you'll be able to go specifically to footy and dance if you wanted something more specific in those areas. You're welcome to connect with us on Facebook and Twitter, and we also have a newsletter that comes out 2 to 3 times a year, and that way you can keep involved in our research activities and also provide feedback so that we can keep continuing growing this program and co-deciding it with everyone's support. This is just a little glimpse. We're revamping our All Play website. So hopefully we'll have it ready by the end of the year, beginning of next year, and it will be really user-friendly and with a lot more opportunities for children to engage directly with the resources as well. And yeah, if you want to learn more or support us in any way with our research or programs, then those are our details as well.
Thanks, Anna and Nicole. And, you know, I like the fact that you've been able to bring some of that evidence base into those practical teaching strategies for our teachers and educators, and even sport coaches. You've got a huge range of resources that we can tap into, and which are all free, which we like to have, but great quality resources which are backed up by evidence-based research. So I think that's very, very valuable. So I know we've gone over time, and we've still got a lot of people online. So that's a reflection of, you know, the content that we're providing to you is valuable. So thanks so much for staying online. We are going to wrap up. I hope as teachers, educators, and even sports coaches, you are feeling quite empowered and informed, and you know where to go for support. And there is a lot of support out out there for you. So please seek it out. I know with the Special Olympics Australia on SOA Learn, we will have a whole stack of resources, and we do have someone there already to support your practice in supporting your students or athletes with autism and intellectual disability. But well done to you for starting or even just continuing or improving your inclusion journey. So well done. Just to note that the resources and the webinar recording will be up online probably mid next week, so give it a week's time. Thanks to all of our presenters for your time to keep us well informed with those practical approaches, but also that evidence base we've just spoken about with All Play. And if you do want to connect with any of the presenters, then their details are on the screen, and please reach out. We have had seen our audience members reach out for specific things from our presenters, so please do so. And thanks to all of our friends who have that lived experience of autism in sharing your stories and your perspectives, and it's just been the most valuable learning that we could have had within this whole series, and you truly are great mentors and leaders for all of us. So I certainly feel more empowered and enriched for this experience. So we will finish the webinar now. We'll also finish the series, and we wish you all the best in your inclusion journey.